Well, hello, and it's a cold day out there. But I'm going to tell you a true story about a January thaw. Now, doesn't matter so much in town, but if you live in the country, a January thaw can do a nasty job on those old gravel roads or the fields where the farmers have to go with a load of manure or whatever. Well, babe, way back when I was not yet 8 years old and in the second grade, so that would be 1938. And almost 300 miles north of here. But I'll tell you about the place first. I went to a little country school called Palmer School. Anybody remember the old Palmer handwriting method? Learning how to write cursive, which kids can't read anymore? Yeah, it was named for that. And it was a good, stout, old schoolhouse. It had a good basement and a big furnace that was fed by wood. And there was a neighbor just around the corner who'd come up on the cold mornings, and he'd make sure the furnace was going so that the teacher and the kids could keep warm. So that was Palmer School. It was such a well-built school that when it finally had to be gotten rid of, somebody bought it and put it on a new foundation in a town about 6 miles north. Well, anyway, back to my story. We had a January thaw. And that meant that on the north side of the school, out in the field, there was a pond that you could slide on, or skate on if you had a pair of skates. I think a couple of kids did that. But you could just take a run and slide across the ice, you know. Ever remember doing that? Ah, yes, those were fun days. Only in the country schools could you do that, I think. Maybe in town too, but I didn't grow up in town. Well, we had a January thaw, and on the north side of the old school building, there was this wonderful ice, like a skating rink. And one day, when it was starting to get warm again, I took one last slide and fell through the ice. Oh dear, it had started to melt again. Well, I turned around and tried to walk out, but every time I'd step, down, down, down I would go until my feet were getting wet in the boots. Yep. And so by the time I was getting close to the school building, I was on my hands and knees, and I was getting pretty wet all over. So what would the teacher do? Well, she was a married woman, very good teacher, Mrs. Hall, Hall. And one day she had given me a special. She saw how I liked to read and write, and she had given me my first dictionary as a gift. Well, anyway, what would she do with this wet kid? Cold and wet. Yeah. Well, she took me down the basement and took off all my clothes. Now, I had to be covered with something to go back upstairs, of course. Well, she hung some things downstairs, and then I think, as I recall, she put her own coat all over me. Maybe a scarf too. Anyway, all I had on, I was barefoot, and I had this old coat on and nothing else. And, well, except for my little sister who was a year younger, you can bet how the other kids acted. It doesn't have any clothes on except for that coat. Well, sometimes when you're embarrassed, you just have to be embarrassed. Yep. Nothing else matters. When people need to laugh, they need to laugh. My little sister didn't laugh, though. She felt sorry for me. And so by the time school was out, well, I went down the basement and my clothes were dry. I got dressed again, even my shoes and old four-buckle boots. I was ready to walk home dry. And so that's what I did. And it's one of those things you can't forget. And like a lot of things you remember, mostly good, but maybe a little bit bad, or at least embarrassing. Now, many years later, when I was in high school and we had to ride the school bus. See, I went to country schools until it was time to go to high school, and then we caught a bus. Well, we would get on the bus at about halfway between where the bus started and where it would take us back. And we were out in a part of the county called Pleasant Valley. And we stopped to pick up a couple of kids, and all of a sudden, the bus just sagged down because in the January thaw, things underneath had gotten wet. And so here was the school bus down to its axles and dry on the top of the road. And I remember the bus driver had to get out and carefully step across this and go find a farmer with a tractor, or I can't remember, horses or a tractor, and a chain, and slowly pull our school bus forward until it was back on fairly solid gravel road. In a January thaw, you never know what's underneath. Oh well, it makes life interesting. So maybe you can all remember something like that. And it was a little rough on the farmers because if you had a tractor, it was worse than if you had horses. Because a tractor could get stuck. And then how do you get the tractor out? Well, that's my story for today. Maybe you can remember one that's kind of like it. Only I'll bet you didn't have to have the teacher put you inside an old coat with no other clothes on.
Thank you.
You